I actually have spent a lot of time studying publishing from a variety of different positions. So let me show you that here. I began working as a bookseller. That was about 20 years ago, so I got a really good handle on what happens on the store floor when someone has your book in their hand and they're trying to sell it to a consumer. That's an extraordinarily important part of the journey your book is going to go on. And if it doesn't work at that end point, you're going to end up with some serious problems, and we'll get into that a little bit later. From having worked as a bookseller, I moved over to a director of merchandising position with a national wholesaler. That was United Magazine Company, and in that role, I actually acted as a buyer. So I had sales reps from different publishing houses trying to get me to pick up their books and put them on display, carry them in our stores. So that was interesting because you got to hear pitches from salespeople. Some of those pitches were effective. Some of them were not terribly effective. And I learned the difference pretty quickly. From there, I moved into marketing for a publishing house. And you learn essentially how to promote a book, how to sell a book. And then I moved from marketing into sales. And this was probably the most important thing. And I think something that a lot of authors could benefit from knowing what happens on a sales call. What happens when the salesperson is sitting in front of the Barnes & Noble buyer? What question does the Barnes & Noble buyer have? And how do you answer? How much time do you have to sell? How much time is your book going to get? And what you can do to make sure that your book gets more time than the average and is more appealing to the buyer than the average book. From there, I moved into the editorial and publishing side, which is where I am now. So it's the creative side of things. And I'm on the different side of the table now than I was before. We'll talk about how that, I think, can benefit you, that kind of very holistic perspective on the book business, and how it can help your work succeed. So here's what we're going to learn today. What barriers are between you and the consumer? How to arm your editor and the salespeople for the publishing house or of the publishing house for which you get picked up so that they can really maximize sales of your book. How to ensure that your book gets the best treatment by your publisher, and how to influence buyers, the people who ultimately are going to decide whether or not your book gets into the hands of the consumer. And being able to get the salespeople on your side is the way to win that. So, basics of the business. You know this more than likely, but the author sells to the publishing house. The publishing house is going to sell to wholesalers, and wholesalers are essentially the people who distribute the book to independent bookstores or anybody that wants to order it. And then retailers. Retailers are the Barnes & Nobles of the world, the Amazons of the world. They can be online. They can be what we call brick and mortar, which is a chain or an independent. It can be a library. And those people eventually get your book into the hands of the consumer. Now, in a perfect world, that's where the story would end. Your book would be in the bookstore, consumers would find it, and it would go out the door, and everyone would be happy. The problem is that if a book does not sell at a certain level, meaning a certain number of copies aren't selling through the register in a certain period of time, bookstores will return your book. And that's one of the problems with the book business is that most product is 100% returnable. So if they don't like it, if it doesn't sell, they can return it pretty much any time. Now, that used to be called the returns department, which apparently the people in that department didn't feel was very sexy because essentially they were dealing with product that didn't work. So as an industry, they decided to change their name to reverse logistics. So if you hear a publisher talk to you about reverse logistics issues, what they're talking about are returns issues. So what happens once you have an editor? And there are different things that happen depending on whether you are fiction or nonfiction.